At last, you are asleep. For 3 nights, each attempt to rest has brought you starting from your bed in fright, with no memory of what horrified you so. With a sickening sense of déjà vu, you begin to dream.
Treachery and doom.
Ultima Underworld. Where to begin with such a great game? How about with the GOG version having not entirely functional sound? Either the sound effects sound wrong or the music comes out from one single channel. Why, I really don't know. The old version worked fine, the one I had on the other PC worked great, but with this one you can't access the executable file for the audio settings. But apart from that and the inevitable comment that the aspect ratio is wrong, yes, it's wrong, but it's also not horrible, Ultima Underworld is the cornerstone of gaming. Because without Ultima Underworld, the majority of first-person RPGs or first-person games in general would not actually exist as they do now. Ultima Underworld was a 3D game, launched before 3D games were anything more than flight simulators. This was before Doom, this was before Wolfenstein 3D, and it looked like this back then. Though it did not run that well, even though the rendering was constrained to a very small portion of the screen. It's actually smaller than you see here because of the horizontal stretching. And yet through that small window you got a simulated world. Blue Sky Productions released this game in 1992, a studio which you may know was later renamed Looking Glass, the one that gave us all sorts of wonders like System Shock, Thief, and a bunch of flight simulators. That word is important. Simulator, simulation, because this is what Ultima Underworld tried to be. It tried to be an RPG that made sense, one where the suspension of disbelief was the easiest thing to do. And how did it do that? Well, by simulating just about everything it could on a 486 processor. This was a game where your character had inertia. Name one game where your character has inertia even now. And I mean it. Go into any first-person game or just about any game you have, run as fast as you can into a wall and at the last second jump. Does your character bounce back in the slightest? Because he should, even a little bit. It's Newtonian physics at work here. The wall can't be pushed back, it's a wall, it's stationary, so it pushes back against you and bounces you back a bit. Just try it in real life. Well, no, don't try it because I'll probably get sued for encouraging you to do that and you'll get in an accident. Physics was an important part of this game because it existed, which is again something that was not valid for any game of this type back in 1992. It actually wasn't valid for many games of many types for a lot of years. And it wasn't just simple Newtonian physics. Well, yeah, it was that, but they applied it to a lot of stuff. You know arrows, those things you shoot out of a bow at people, or pebbles from a sling? Those were projectiles in this game. Yes, projectiles. They were fired from your weapon, and you could actually see them as they moved through the air, as they hit their target, and then you could pick them up later if they weren't destroyed. How amazing is that? This game could have had the arrow to the knee joke back in 1992, but it didn't have that joke because it was a better written game. One where not only physics were simulated, but also the environment itself. Now that meant that, well, firstly, it had lighting, which is again not a concept that was really all that existent back then. It had variable lighting in a 3D space that had slanted floors with different levels of elevation, even non-straight walls. Now, they may not have been circular, but they were angled sometimes. Angled walls, variable levels of of floors, the ability to look up and down. That was something you didn't even see in Doom or Doom 2. This was build level type of technology, which came a lot of years later. And it wasn't all about the technology, though the technology was a really big part of this. Ultima Underworld simulated a world in every way that's possible. It had characters in this world that weren't there to be killed. They were there to be talked to be interacted with. You could kill them and still finish the game because that wasn't what they were there to do. They weren't there to enable your quest. They were there because they lived there. Because in this Stygian Abyss, this gigantic dungeon, some old coot came up with the idea to create a functional society. That old coot died and now haunts your dreams, but that's a part of the story. You get to see a failed utopia before it was cool to have one in just about every game. Each level had a different society or several of them fighting for control. Though they couldn't really fight for control, this was a game made to run on 486s, so they mostly had you fight for control. Well, mostly two factions had you fight for them, the goblins, each wanting you to kill the other ones. And they had their reasons. The Greys, if I'm not mistaken, used to be slaves of the Greens, or vice versa, and they didn't get along. And the deeper you went, the more varied the people you found were. There were reptiles, lizardmen that could not speak English, so you had to learn their language, and not by reading a book and then having the dialogue options just show up. No, you had to actually learn their language. You had to type in the words yourself. This game blew my mind. You could talk to a big freaking lizard and not kill it. If you went deeper, you would find ghouls that, again, you didn't kill because they just ate human flesh that was deceased, on account of them being trapped where they were after a cave-in and not having anything else to eat. I actually think that's where you found the banjo, or the lute, and you can play it. You can also play a flute. Now this did not help you in any way. It did not give you a weapon. It did not, or at least I think it didn't. You did have a bard character, so maybe I missed something, but still, you could act in this world like you would in an actual world, talking to people, interacting with objects, getting beaten over the head if you stole stuff, and you could actually see what stuff belonged to whom, which is something the Elder Scrolls game didn't do with Morrowind, leading to my character being brutally murdered in a tavern for picking a flower. This didn't happen in Ultima Underworld. Yes, he would get beaten to death if you stole something important. Otherwise, you could just trade for stuff or maybe do favors for a certain mountain king. Doesn't like being called a dwarf, so he'll let you in his treasury. Ultima Underworld was ahead of its time in just about every way imaginable. Even in the most simple aspect of them all, the controls. This is a game you could fully control with your mouse, completely. Or if you use the keyboard, you use the WASD and X keys to move around. S was to walk forward, W to run forward, and X to go backwards. And mind you, games like Quake still use the arrow keys for this. This game inspired people to try and do more with video games in terms of technology, in terms of design, in terms of so many things. Legend goes that John Carmack himself saw an early version of Ultima Underworld and thought that he could write a faster texture mapper, and that's why Wolfenstein 3D doesn't look like Hovercraft 3D. Just about everyone that played it had the idea to try something similar. That's where we got the Elder Scrolls series from. It's because of this. This is where we got the concept of first-person immersion in a video game. Because up until now, what did you have? You had wizardry, you had maybe might and magic, where you controlled about 5, 6 or 8 characters in such a way that made you in no way feel like you were actually there. But this one did. This one was flight simulator level of simulation of you being there. Only it wasn't a flight simulator, though you could fly with a spell and again go to different elevations as if you were actually in a 3D space, which for the most part, let's say you were. And again, because this game was made by those people at Blue Sky, by Paul Neurath, by Doug Church, by Warren Spector, by so many other people, we went on to have games like System Shock, like Thief, like Deus Ex, like Bioshock, like Dishonored, and so many others, because this one game existed. It played a pivotal role in the evolution of video games, a role that cannot be understated in any way, shape or form. You need to play this. If you haven't played this, you need to try it. You need to understand what this game brought to the table, what this game imagined games could be, what it proved that games could become. Just compared to any other game released in 1992, any other first-person game I mean. Even Wolfenstein, which was released after this one, after it. You'll see a world of difference because this was a game where if you run into a locked door, you just didn't go around looking for the key every time. If you had a sharp enough axe that wasn't completely broken, you could just chop down that door unless it was made from metal. And I ask you, how many games you know even now where if you find a locked door, a wooden door, a simple wooden door, half a wooden door, a broken door that's locked somehow but still you could probably jump through it, and yet you can't pass unless you find a way to unlock it? How many games? How many times did you go through Half-Life 2 with a rocket launcher and were stopped because of a locked door and had to go the long way around? Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 4, they had those doors, in quotation marks, because they were mostly a piece of wood through which you could walk through, but somehow, because they were locked, you couldn't. You had to open them somehow, but not by using explosives. You needed a key, or you needed maybe a bobby pin, which is something kind of bizarre because Fallout 1, 2, and Tactics actually let you blow up doors. But this came from the Elder Scrolls type of gameplay, which should have been inspired by Ultima Underworld, but they didn't implement it fully. They didn't make a simulation, they made a game that tried to have the same immersion factor, which never really panned out to the fullest because it didn't go completely on the path of simulation. And again, this game was made in 1992 by a handful of people in a basement, and I think it was under 2 years. And mind you, this was the crisis of its time in terms of graphics, and yet it was made to be this complex. Not complicated. To the player, it wasn't a complicated game, but the world itself was complex. It had layers. It was the kind of game that let you have an automap and write on it, which is again something important because there weren't really that many games with automaps back then, or at all, frankly. So give Ultima Underworld a go, please. You will not regret it. You don't have to finish it, just try and play it for a few levels, go down, explore, talk to a lizard, go hug a lurker and realize they aren't all friendly, and find that secret Armageddon spell that kills everyone. And yet you could still finish the game, mostly because at the end you had to fight sort of Satan, and you couldn't kill him with that spell. You can find this game on GOG in a version that has really bad audio. I really hope they fix it, because frankly, after Heroes of Might and Magic 2 and Might and Magic 4 and 5, I was expecting them to have a better version of the game. It's just not up to certain standards. But still, even without sound, it can be an amazing game. I should know, I first played it on a PC that didn't have an audio adapter, which was kinda sad because the music is great when it sounds right, not how it sounds by default in the GOG version. It may take you a while to tweak it, but it will be worth it. I guarantee it. If you enjoyed this show, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Or, if you thought it was horrible, then share it with your enemies and make them suffer. We shall be your weapon of vengeance. But if you liked what you saw, you could, I don't know, maybe donate, because basically YouTube is horrible at revenue, by using the link in the description, or just buy my book. It's a fantasy book about, well, a lot of stuff. I guarantee it won't suck, and if it does suck, you can find me here and complain about it.